Welcome to tonight's video on Unit 2, Part 2. We're talking more about postulates and how we use them to do algebraic proofs. So there's some properties of algebra that we're going to use to do these proofs. So the first one is the addition property, which says you can add the same number to both sides. Right, so here notice we're adding c to both sides. If a equals b, then a plus c is equal to b plus c. Same goes for the subtraction property. You can subtract the same thing from both sides. Multiplication means you multiply the same thing to both sides. And division means you divide the same thing to both sides. There's also what's called the reflexive property, which means that something is equal to itself. For example, 5 equals 5. That's reflexive. The symmetric property says that if a equals b, then you can also reverse it and say b equals a. And then the transitive property says if a equals b and b equals c, so notice b is in the middle there, then a is equal to c. So for example, if x equals 5 and 5 equals y, then x equals y, right? Because they're both equal to 5. That's transitive. Substitution is when you replace a and b in an expression, and we'll talk about that. For example, if we say if x equals 5, and x plus 3 equals y, then by putting 5 in, that is substitution because we're replacing what it's equal to. The distributive property says if we have a times parentheses b plus c, that we can distribute it in. So for example, if 5 equals x plus 3, or sorry, 5 times x plus 3, we get 5 times x plus 5 times 3. That's the distributive property. So let's look at some statements, and we'll say which property best describes them. So for example here, it says 2 times lm plus no equals 2 times lm plus 2 times no. So notice what they do. They distributed the 2, so this is the distributive property. If m equals r, then if the measure of angle r equals the measure of angle s, then the measure of angle r plus measure of angle t equals the measure of angle s plus the measure of angle t. Notice they added the measure of angle t to both sides. So this is the addition property. Whenever it says measure angle z equals measure angle z, so notice it equals itself. That is the reflexive property. If 2 times PQ is equal to OQ, then PQ is equal to half of OQ. Notice what they did here is they divided by 2, or you could say they multiplied by 1/2. So you could do either the multiplication property or the division property, either one, because remember when you divide by 2, it's the same as multiplying by 1/2. Here BC equals CD and CD equals EF, so then notice it says BC equals EF. This is the transitive property. You could also make a case for substitution because you substituted in EF for CD and BC for CD. Here, the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 75. 2 equals 3, so then notice what happened is they substituted in 3 for 2. So this would be the substitution property. All right, next it says which statement shows an example of the symmetric property. Remember, symmetric means that you can flip the sides of the equal sign. So notice this is reflexive. If x equals 3, then x plus 4 equals 7. That's addition. They added 4 to both sides. If x equals 3, then 3 equals x. That is symmetric. All right, because notice in D, x equals 3, x equals y, then y equals 3. That could be either transitive or substitution. So now we're given some proofs. So notice whenever you see a proof, you're going to have two columns. You have statements and reasons. You're going to have given information, like here 2 times 5 minus 3a minus 4 times a plus 7 equals 92. And then there's something you have to prove. So here you're going to prove that a equals 11, or sorry, negative 11. The first statement in a proof is always given. So for the first statement, you're going to repeat the given information. So that's the reason. So the second statement, well, you want to know what they do from the first to the second. Well, if you notice, what they did is they distributed the 2 and the negative 4. Right, so they distributed, so they used the distributive property. All right, so they have 10 minus 6a minus 4a minus 28 equals 92. Or if you notice, the 10 minus 28, they combined there. So then what they did is notice they said negative 6 minus 4a minus 18 equals 92. So basically they redistributed. So that's also the distributive property. And then negative 6 minus 4 is the same as negative 6 plus negative 4. So that could be considered the addition property, because notice what they did is they added 18 to both sides here. Right? Notice they added 18. So that's the addition property. And then notice they divided negative 10 to get a equals negative 11. So that's the division property. So let's look at another one here. So the same thing, the first statement's always given. And then the second statement, or want to know how did they go from the first to the second? Well, notice they distributed the negative 3 and the 5. Right, and then they also combined like terms. So negative 9 plus 15 is 6. And they have negative 3x plus 5x equals negative 50. So they distributed to get from number 1 to number 2. And notice to go from number 2 to number 3. So they basically redistributed the numbers with the x. So negative 3 plus 5 is 2x. So that's also distributive property. It's not addition because they didn't add these numbers to both sides. They just basically combined like terms, and that's another way to say they distributed. So now from 2x plus 6 equals negative 50, how did they get to 2x equals negative 56? Well, they subtracted 6 from both sides. So that's the subtraction property. And then to go from 2x equals negative 56 to x equals negative 28, they divided by 2. So that's the division property. Why don't you look at number 5 and then see if you can do that one on your own, and then we'll go over the answers. All right, so if you look at number 1, that's just rewriting the given information, d equals 20t plus 5. Notice to go from 1 to 2, they subtracted 5 from both sides. So d minus 5 equals 20t. Then they divided 20. So that's why from 2 to 3 is the division property. And then from 3 to 4, all they did is switch sides of the equal sign, and that is the symmetric property. All right, so now we take it a step further. Some of the statements are blank, but for the first statement, we are given the given information. So we can put the reason as given. So now A equals 1/2 B1 plus B2 times H. Well, notice the first thing I would want to do here is I would want to multiply by 2 to get rid of the fraction. So when you multiply by 2 here to get rid of the fraction, notice you get 2A equals B1 plus B2 times H. That is the multiplication property. We're multiplying both sides by 2. All right, so then the next step, notice from here, they divided by B1 plus B2 to get H by itself. So that's the division property. Notice they divided both sides by B1 plus B2. You don't have to write that, but I'm just showing you how that's the division. So then from 3, so we want to end up with H equals 2A over B1 plus B2. And the only thing we did is switch sides of the equal sign, so that is the symmetric property. All right, so try the next one on your own, and then we'll go over the answers. All right, so if you look at number 7, you're given 3 things. You're given angle A is congruent to angle B, the measure of angle B is equal to 2 times the measure of angle C, and the measure of angle C is equal to 45. So this is all given to you. We're trying to prove that the measure of angle A equals 90. So the second statement, it says the measure of angle A equals the measure of angle B. Well, that's related to the fact that it says A is congruent to B. So remember, definition of congruent angles says that if 2 angles are congruent, the measures are equal. So that is definition of congruent angles. To go from 2 to 3, it says substitution property of equality 1b. So here, you're going to substitute into 2. So remember, you want to get the measure of angle A. So A is going to stay the same, but what you're going to substitute into is that 2 times the measure of angle C is equal to the measure of angle B. So that's what you substitute. And then it says for 4, you're substituting 1C in for 3. So basically what you're doing is you're taking and replacing C with 45. Remember, angle A stays the same. So it's 2 times 45 or 90 degrees. And that's what you're trying to prove, that the measure of angle A was equal to 90. All right, so that concludes part 2. We'll start talking about more proofs in part 3. All right, have a good evening.